Welcome to another edition of Inspired Stories, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes, how they've overcome adversity, and explore current challenges they're facing.
Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. My name is Anthony Codispoti, and today's guest is Brian Shapiro, CEO of Shapiro's Delicatessen. With 2 locations in Indianapolis, Indiana, they have a legacy that goes back farther than any guest I've ever had. Their ancestors had a grocery business in Odessa, Ukraine in 1795. Fast forward to 1905 when Louis and Rebecca Shapiro fled anti-Semitism in Russia to arrive in Indianapolis, where they brought their family heritage of providing nourishing food to America. They began selling flour and sugar on the street from a push cart. A couple years later, they opened their first deli just south of downtown Indy, where the family lived above the store and everyone pitched in. Over the years, the family has a history of standing up to oppression and anti-Semitism. Brian has a strong interest in and has been heavily involved in the local Indianapolis community, which we'll hear more about. Shapiro's have evolved their concept and product offering over the years and are proudly serving the community from both their downtown location at 808 South Meridian Street and at the Indianapolis Airport. Now, before we get into all that good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Add Back Benefits Agency, where we offer very specific and unique employee benefits that are both great for your team and fiscally optimized for your bottom line. One recent client was able to add over $900 per employee per year in extra cash flow by implementing one of our proprietary programs. Results vary for each company, and some organizations may not be eligible. To find out if your company qualifies, contact us today at addbackbenefitsagency.com. Now, back to our guest today, the CEO of Shapiro's Delicatessen, Brian. I appreciate you making the time to share your story today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, Brian, let's start with the customer experience at Shapiro's. Paint a picture for someone who has never been before and you want to entice them in.
Well, we have the advantage that we've been in business for 120 years. So in some regards, we're a legacy. And people come to Indianapolis and around the Midwest to eat, Jewish style food. In fact, during the pandemic, we had quite a few people from central Illinois that would journey to Indianapolis on the weekends to eat at our restaurant because the restaurants in Illinois were closed. So, our journey is how we are. We're well known. I always tell people we're a dinosaur because we, actually make the food from the beginning. We don't buy any pre-cut, pre-made, pre-peeled potatoes or lettuce or anything. We hand cut every item, and which drives my financial people cuckoo because it's expensive to do that, and our labor costs are high, but it's how we've been doing it. And I'm not going to be the person that's going to change what has made us successful. We use Kraft Philadelphia cream cheese. We buy them in 60-pound blocks for our cheesecake, which costs twice as much as, some other brand, but it tastes different. And that's what the recipe calls for. So we do everything we can to stick to original ingredients, original names, and try not to substitute. So when people come into the restaurant, everything that we give them or sell them is the finest that we can buy either locally, nationally, or even internationally.
And so when somebody walks in, is it more of like a meat deli counter? Is it a restaurant style sit down? Is it a combination of the two?
Well, we have 2 sides. We started out, as you pointed out, in the grocery store business. And then as the Jewish neighborhood changed, we added more food meals that you could purchase. And eventually the Jewish neighborhood, in fact, the entire neighborhood disappeared, and we were strictly a restaurant. However, we did have a delicatessen counter where we cut corned beef and pepper beef and salami and lox. And just recently, our area is becoming gentrified with modern apartments, old housing stock that has been remodeled, and becoming more vibrant as it was 50 years ago. But when you come in, the restaurant side is cafeteria style, old fashioned Jewish deli, cafeteria style, where people, pick out what they want. And, I have experimented with trying to get away with that concept, and it doesn't work. When people think of Shapiro's in our name, they have a picture of what it looks like. And young people that come in and going, oh no, this looks like school. And then once they get used to it, it becomes part of the shtick that we have. It's just how we do business. It's how we deliver food. And, the customer actually talks to the person that's cutting their meat for their sandwiches. So if they want it leaner or thinner or fattier, they can actually get that to happen. And I think that kind of adds to the flavor of the restaurant, to why we are successful, is that we can make that happen. My youngest daughter does artificial intelligence for NVIDIA, and I always talk to her about becoming more automated, and she goes, no, don't do that. Make people think. Make people have to decide what kind of mustard they want and what kind of cheese they want, and they have to interact with somebody. Now,
is that what you mean by it? It's like school?
Well, at school, you just pick up what you want. At a cafeteria in a school, that's the first thing that people would see. The difference with us is that there's actually interaction with the sandwich cutter or with people that make food. So it's more than just a delivery method. It's also an interaction with human beings that create your product that you want to eat.
And your daughter is encouraging you not to lose that.
That is correct.
Not to go towards the side of automation, right, but encourage that customization,
right,
that interaction.
And we do have online ordering, and the online people are always selling us a product. And then when we sign the contract, about a week into it, they go, this is far more complicated than anything we've ever done. So there's all these add-ons that you can do to a sandwich. And it's more than a normal amount. I mean, it is a huge number. And sometimes it changes because of, what the produce is. I mean, we've about to finish up with asparagus, but, we have fresh vegetables all year round. And, this year, the produce is 2 weeks early everywhere. Michigan, blueberries have started in the southern part of the state, and that's 2 weeks early. So everything is early.
Why is it early this year?
Warm. It's been warmer. The northern states didn't get a late frost, which usually kills stuff, and we didn't get that or shrinks it. So we're going to have a very robust crop, which is good because, produce cost is through the roof. I mean, fortunately, Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, broccoli is coming into play. And because the California and Texas crop was kind of light. In fact, last couple of weeks, bushels of broccoli was $72, which is double what it should be. So we should be seeing a dramatic decrease in the price of produce, at least for the next 3 months.
And so when you see those big fluctuations in produce prices, are those things that you're able to build into an increased cost of the product, or is that something that you just take on the chin?
We try to look holistically for the entire year of what to price produce. When the broccoli got to $72 a bushel, I just told him not to order any. We just didn't have it. And
Got it.
as you know, when the price of produce goes up, the quality generally goes down. You know, it's one of those weird things. When the price is inexpensive, there's a bountiful supply, and the quality is very good.
Now, looking at your site here, Brian, I see parties and catering. Are these significant sources of revenue for you guys?
You know, it's kind of interesting. Before the pandemic, maybe 9 or 10% of our business was catering. The pandemic made it go to 0. We are recently seeing more catering, more parties, more use of that activity. A lot of the companies that have gone to remote work, at some point in time, they're having people get together. And it's usually in their old office, in their conference rooms. And, you know, they want to bring people together. And, you know, they finally have figured out that food is kind of a great way of getting people to come to eat, you know, to come together. And, you know, in the old Jewish fashion of breaking bread, you know, I mean, you know, an old Friday night habit of, you know, breaking bread. So, you know, people got around and they talked. And I'm seeing an uptick in that occurring. Different than before, where you'd cater an office party. Now we're kind of catering sections of groups of people of offices, you know, that want people to come together and talk about what's going on. So we're seeing kind of a new version of catering. I don't know if that I explained it well enough, but
Sure. Yeah, the pandemic kind of wiped things out, and then now coming back from the pandemic, the catering looks a little bit different than it used to.
Right. I mean, you're still selling the same products, or maybe a slight different in the market share of what they want, but it is coming back in a slightly different form, but, you know, same dollars.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, Brian, was there for you any doubt growing up that you would become part of this family legacy, this family business?
Well, I went to Indiana University as an undergrad accounting major at Kelly School of Business, and then I went on to law school in Bloomington, and really kind of thought I was going to be a tax lawyer, tax treaty person working in LA. But I'd always kind of grown up in the family business. You know, my side of the family, my grandfather Joe, who worked in the Delicatessen in Indianapolis, married a gal and moved to East Central Indiana in a family that had 9 grocery stores. So I'd always kind of grown up in the grocery business. And then as I got older, my great uncle Max, who was running Shapiro's Delicatessen, decided that I needed to run the store because he was getting older and didn't know what to do with it, didn't have any kids. So they kind of appointed me to do it. And about 5-6 months after I came in to work, he died.
Oh, wow.
So here was this historical restaurant basically just dropped on me with, I had employees that had been with Uncle Max for 40 or 50 years. And here I am, 24, 25 years of age, dealing with people that have been there 40 or 50 years. And I also inherited 3 other great aunts and uncles to manage their affairs. So it was kind of a shock when you're 24, 25 years of age, goes, oh, by the way, not only are you going to run this historical restaurant, you also have 3 other family members that are in their 80s that you're going to take care of until they die.
That's a lot to put on the plate of a young man.
So it was a very interesting experience. It was fine. I mean, it worked out, but it truly gives one a different perspective on life. Because again, I was dealing with people that were my father's aunts and uncles, that some that were born in Russia. So and again, it all worked out, and everybody was taken care of and happy.
Where do you see the business going from here? Do you like the 2 locations that you have? Do you see some growth opportunities? Do you see trying new concepts?
Shapiro's was part of the screwball exhibit in Los Angeles on Jewish delicatessens, and it traveled to New York and Houston and ended at the Holocaust Museum in Skokie. The LA exhibition, we were a very large part of the exhibition. In fact, when you walked in, my great uncle Abe was this gigantic billboard of Jewish delicatessens. So I was invited to the opening in Chicago, and they had the morning drive host of WGN spending an hour with Levy of Levy Brothers, Melman of Let Us Entertain You, the owner of Manny's Deli, and another Jewish successful person in the restaurant business in Chicago. They spent the first 5 minutes talking about the delicatessen business, about how it made no sense in today's restaurant world because we don't serve alcohol. Our food costs are high, and it just doesn't make the model of private equity or banks. The other 55 minutes was trying to figure out how to fix Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And the point that I'm making is that, the Jewish deli is kind of a dinosaur. Unless you've already been in business, it's hard to redo it. Now, granted, there are people that are mom and pop operations that open up Jewish delicatessens in cities throughout the country, and they do quite well. There's one in Atlanta. My oldest daughter went to Emory University, and there was one called General Muir, and it's kind of a modern Jewish deli concept, and I think they do a good job. But the owner is the chef, and he's there. So I think that the future of the Jewish delicatessen is somewhat limited, except for the neighborhood people that are going to do it themselves. And, rather than being a manager or a chef someplace, they're going to put their passion into the little local stores. But again, the biggest difficulty that we have is food cost. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, you take a pastrami, a real Jewish pastrami comes from the navel. 98% of your people that listen to your podcast have no idea what a navel is. And the type of pastrami that they're eating is probably coming from a flat or a round or some other type of cut of meat. Because the navel is, if it was on a pig, it'd be bacon. And it's a very rough cut of meat. I mean, it is a cut of meat that became a pastrami because it was a tough piece of meat, had lots of fat on it, had gristle in it, had all kinds of stuff in it. So, they had to cure it, they had to smoke it to make it tender. And it's just hard to do. And it's hard to find labor that wants to trim it out and deal with it. And most of the navels, because of the shortage in the butcher industry, they just grind it up for hamburger. I mean, they just throw it in for hamburger, or they export it to Korea or Japan. So it's a cut of beef that when they're on the assembly line at a large production kill plant, it costs too much. There's too many trims and cuts in it that have to occur as it's going down the assembly line. So, as I say, most of it just gets thrown into hamburger. So back to the original point is, the future of the deli, it is somewhat limited because of our cost and the inability of our food to really go well with alcohol. Most wine, you need some cream-based product to have wine with, or an oil-based product. I mean, when you think about when you are drinking wine and what pairs with what, a corned beef sandwich goes pretty good with a lager. Doesn't go really well with much of any type of beer. And, private equity who invest in restaurants and want returns, they want alcohol or non-alcoholic beverages. They want it now to be 50%. And in the old days, they were happy if it was 25%, but they now want menus around high profit items. And, so you now have investment bankers making decisions for restaurants.
Have you experimented with alcohol in your locations at all?
We sell beer and wine, but it's less than 1% of sales. We just, beer and wine, the beer goes, and as I mentioned to you in a prior conversation, we originally had 10 kinds of different beers. We had Miller Lite, we had Budweiser, we had Heineken's, we had Guinness, we had all these different types of beers. And one of our local people comes to me and wanted me to put in their beer. And I look at my managers and I go, having 10 or 12 different kinds of beer was a real pain, because you had to take inventory of 10 or 12 kinds. It was just took up a lot of space. So we switched and we put in 3 beers of Daredevil, which is a beer made by the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And beer sales doubled. Go figure.
Okay.
Here's all this marketing and advertising of Budweiser and Miller, and everybody knows who they are. And then we put up these 3 beers from Daredevil, and they sell. And a lot of times, people will see the beer, and the customer will go, "What is this?" Because, well, it's a local beer that we sell. We don't have any other brands. And people try it. And we tell them, I go, if you don't like it, bring it back. We'll give you something else. We'll give you back their money. It's like we want people to be happy. And, they buy it. They like it. It gets people outside their comfort zone.
And so do you think the beer sales doubled because this was just a novel product, or it was better, or maybe there were fewer options now and that made it easier for people to choose something?
I think it could be, I think you could write an essay on all 3 of those. Okay. I think it's a combination thereof. I think that, again, it steps outside of people's normal comfort zone. It's like the craft beers, very successful model. Obviously some of them are more successful than others, but, people go, well, these are kind of cool. And it's different. It's not been mass produced. They're all small batches. So somebody's actually tasting them. It's not a computer. It's not like, it's not like wine, where, you'll have a great bottle of wine, and then you start the next year, you go, well, this is not as good. And then you find out it's owned by, some monster publicly traded company, and they're just spiking it with previous year's blends and different amounts of sugar to make sure that it all tastes alike. Mm. So a true connoisseur of wine goes, you know what, you're selling this to the masses. And, they want, and, their MBAs that are running the company are going, hey, we want it to be the same. We want standardization. Let me assure you, if you get a corned beef sandwich at Shapiro's, the one that you get versus the next person in line, it's going to be a little bit different because it came from a little bit different piece of the brisket. And 10 customers later, it'd be a whole different brisket. So so in my business, it's not perfect. It's not standardized. In fact, I think we make it a big deal that it's not standardized. And again,
there's beauty in that imperfection.
And again, and if you get a sandwich and you take it to the table and you think it's too fat, here, bring it back. We'll trade it in. You never know. We make hundreds and hundreds of sandwiches a day, and we try to be as good as we can. And sometimes we're just not perfectly perfect.
Well, and what you're describing, though, is a tremendous level of customer service that you don't get in a lot of places.
Oh, well, the other, unfortunately, my wife and I, about 3 weeks ago, went to France. And the week before, my business manager controller passed away suddenly. And so I hired a contract CFO group that only does financial and cost accounting, no tax work. And, they have this long questionnaire, and they interview my managers, and Christy looks at me. She goes, we do a lot of restaurants. The last person that you've hired new in this restaurant was in October, which was 9 months ago. I go, yeah, we don't have a lot of turnover. People come to us and, they don't leave.
What do you attribute that to? That's not something I hear very often from people that I talk to.
We
It's a tight labor market. It's hard to find good people. It's hard to keep good people.
we invest a lot of effort in keeping people, trying to make them better, trying to help them. And it's important that the employee understands that it's a family business and they get a lot of flexibility with a family business. Before the pandemic, people working 5-6 days a week. I would estimate that 80% of my employees now want to work 4 days a week, and they just as soon work 10 or 11-hour days as 5, 8, or 9-hour days. So we adjusted that, which, obviously increased the number of employees and how we manage it, but it works. And we have some employees that, they just as soon work 5 or 6 days a week and they're done. But I would gander that 80% of my people want to work only 4 days a week.
And longer days.
Longer
so
days.
You get their hours. Yeah. And how many days a week are you open?
7.
Okay. Even on the Sabbath.
Yeah, even on the Sabbath. We used to, before the pandemic, we were open for breakfast. Now we just do breakfast on the weekends. Okay. I post-pandemic seems not, the breakfast crowd doesn't seem as big as it was. And, I think that because people are working at home, they're just eating at home. And I think they figured out that they can make just as good a cappuccino at home than Starbucks, and not pay
for a lot less,
and not pay $9 for brown water.
I want to go back to what you're doing for the employees, aside from having more flexible schedules for them, and allowing them, if they want to work, longer days, but 4 days a week instead of shorter days and 5 or 6 days a week. What are some of the other things that you're doing to help retain and recruit good people?
Well, first of all, I think every employee that I have, except for one, which is a very unusual situation, somewhat dictated by this employee's father, who is his guardian. I think that every employee of mine makes at least $15 an hour as a base. And the average wage is probably around $23 to $26 an hour. And
compare that to what is the minimum wage in Indiana right now?
$7.75.
Okay.
Indiana has a legislature that is, they just want to let the free market dictate the wage. So the wage in Indianapolis, is somewhere between $12.50 and $20 an hour to start a job. In small towns in Indiana, it might be $8. So it's just different. And in some of the suburbs of Indianapolis, it may even be higher.
So you guys are able to offer a much better wage to your folks than
right, and that is important. And then we have kind of, with the tipping that we do and then customers do, that helps a lot in motivating employees to be nice, to upsell. Now, I'll make the footnote that doesn't always happen. We sometimes get an employee and a customer that get into it and argue, and we resolve that. and sometimes employees lose their jobs because of things that they have done. So we try to make it very customer oriented. The employees completely understand that they want to make more money. We got to sell more product. It's a very clear thing. It's not like, the cooks know that they want to make more money. They got to cook more. It's not one of these programs. Well, don't sell that, or I don't. This is hard to make, or whatever. We are a very fast paced, capitalistic organization that is focused on customer service and good food and rewarding employees. And again, we have not hired a new person since October, although my general manager the other day said that she may want to hire another person. But, you've talked to a lot of restaurants, been to a lot of restaurants. We don't lose any busboys. We don't lose any busboy. And if we do lose a busboy, I can assure you that within 6 months, they're begging to come back.
It's a desirable place to work the way you're describing.
Right. They do well. And but again, how do we stay in business as 120 years through generations? So your original question is the future. I think the future of our business is just kind of complicated. We're going to build a hotel across the street from the restaurant and some heritage property that we own, and myself and a good friend of mine, Steve Oakley, that's a James Beard chef and worked at Trotter's in his young youth, have been designing a rooftop bar menu with the, shall we call it, the direction of private equity. So, and Steve's kind of funny. He goes, some of these guys are kind of scary, but he goes, I understand, once you start listening to them and you start seeing and you go, okay, we get it. So we, and it's very interesting with these rooftop bars that private equity goes, here are 3 items that you must have on the menu: a hamburger, French fries, and a chicken sandwich. And
how do you feel about accommodating that?
It's fine. I look at, we sell hamburger. We get the vast majority of our hamburger from southern Indiana by one of the few live kill plants that's USDA inspected in the country. Because we were buying the stuff already ground in the chubs and from, Iowa beef, or, they're just mass produced. And, I kept seeing these recalls and I'm going, this is just crazy. So, we started up with them maybe 15 years ago, and, they make it and it's fine. It's relatively locally sourced, maybe 100 miles from Indianapolis. And so, I know a little bit about hamburger, and, we'll end up doing a smash burger style. It's quicker. We won't probably make it super duper flat. It'll be flat, but not to the point that it's just hard cooked. And, but we will also add other items on the rooftop bar menu that will encourage consumption of liquid.
Carry the Shapiro's name?
No, but okay. We probably will have a pastrami sandwich or something, that they can have, because We close at 7:30 at night, and this will close at 11.
Okay. What's the timeline for this opening, do you think?
16 months.
Okay.
You know, we started right before the pandemic, and then we had the pandemic. So then that stopped things. And then, we've been trying to try to catch material costs going down, and kind of this somewhat, I guess you would call it a retail commercial recession.
Brian, you mentioned COVID, and I came across an article that made reference to a previous crisis that you endured that kind of put you in a better position to face the unexpected COVID pandemic. I'm curious to hear more about that. Is that not ringing a bell?
Well, we had a fire.
Okay.
In 2001, I think. It was winter. We had an ice dam on the roof. And the roofing contractor that we've known and used forever sent somebody up there, and it was 20 degrees outside, and they took a torch to melt the ice dam. Problem was, the torch got a little bit too hot underneath and did $1 million of damage in the building. So we were closed for about 90 days.
Wow.
So that kind of helped deal with what do you call, hang on one second. It's my 2-year-old dog, Millie. As I say, we're up here in northern Michigan, and she's in a room up here and can look at the woods, and there's probably a chipmunk or something that she's not happy with. And I got the door shut. So back to your question, we have, we had this fire that tore the thing apart, and we, had to re-examine putting it back together. But, we've had, just, when you've been running a business for 40 years or so, and you have spent your whole life growing up in the food business, you have all kinds of issues that you deal with. I think that, one time we had a second location on the north side of Indianapolis, and one of my managers got shot and killed.
Oh, wow.
And, I had just recently gotten married, and it was completely tough, difficult. So, you start second guessing yourself. What could we have done? Why did this happen? Was it random? Did we, were our procedures of closing too laxed? Because, you never think if anything like that was going to happen until it happens. So
what were some of the things that you did to not only for yourself to get through that, but to support staff through that difficult time?
Well, we had meetings with the staff on the loss and anger, but eventually we added night security, off-duty Indianapolis police officers, and we spent quite a bit of money on that, but it makes a safer place. Hopefully we have internally less theft. Externally we have less theft. Keeps the parking lot safer. And, crime is everywhere. You can talk about it being in major cities, but it's in the suburbs as bad. A lot of it is not talked about as much. A lot of drug issues in rich, affluent areas. So, all of these things are stuff that, we just deal with in the restaurant business. We have everything. So, when you come to Shapiro's and you get a meal, I'm not going to tell anybody that it's inexpensive because the food is just expensive, and it's going up. I mean, because the labor cost is going up, and the entire supply side is just not doing well. There's a trucker shortage. There's refrigeration trucking shortage. Private equity has gobbled up these small trucking companies that would do less than a full load of freight. And, they'll ship products from the East Coast to, say, Toledo, and then send it from there. And every time food, frozen or fresh, is touched and moved, there's a big opportunity for it to get mishandled and bad things to happen to it. And, unfortunately, private equity people have no idea. They just go, well, this is the most efficient thing to do. Toledo's an inexpensive place. It's, near Detroit and Chicago, and we can redirect stuff from there. And that's fine and well, but highly perishable products that have a short shelf life, it's not good because you're adding a day or two of transportation to it.
Brian, I'd like to take a step back and talk a little bit more about your family legacy, because reading on your website and some of the articles that I found, there's quite a legacy of what I'll call adaptation. Whether your family in the past has had to be bold and decisive in the face of, oppression or just the changing local food environment. I'm curious to hear you share maybe one of your favorite stories of what I'll call family adaptation over the years.
Well, my great uncle Max, who died in 84 at 80, maybe the original food story was herring. And the herring would come in these gigantic wooden barrels, and they'd be in the cooler. And my great uncle Max would complain about, sticking his hand in these, these barrels of salt brine with pickled herring in it. So he always tells a story about one day he didn't want to wait on this customer, and his mother, Rebecca, said, "Maxie, go wait on her." He goes, "I don't want to wait on her because she's a bad customer." And Rebecca looks, broken English, looks at him and goes, "What are you talking about?" "Well, whatever fish I pick her, she doesn't like. So I got to go back and go pick a different fish out. It could be the same fish, but she wants me to go back." And, herring, which very few people even know about anymore, once you get herring on your skin, it's very difficult to get off. I mean, if you cut a fresh onion, you get that onion oil in you. Well, this is triple that. So Rebecca looks at her son and goes, "Maxie, the only bad customer is the one that doesn't come in." So, yeah, talk about family heritage and learning. That's kind of a pretty big item. I mean, that kind of speaks for it all. Unfortunately for me, and I try to do better, but, sometimes it's best for me not to talk to an angry customer, which is why my wife is great at dealing with customers, because sometimes I look at them and go, well, what do you want me to do? What would make you happy? And you'd think, well, that's a pretty black and white answer. A lot of customers are pissed off over that answer because they're going, well, you're not making me happy. You're just being smart with me. You screwed up. I go, well, and so, those are my answer is not sometimes a good answer. Whereas my wife and some other people are just much better at going, yeah, that didn't turn out real well or something. And, more loving in their answer, where I'm like, no, I just want to fix it.
Now, is there a succession plan in place? Is there any family that would like to take over the leadership role?
Well, that is a great question on the 5th generation. My oldest child, Ellen, went to Emory, worked in a Fortune 100 company, and now does private equity. And the youngest one works for NVIDIA and does artificial intelligence. And I really don't know whether or not any of them want to be on call 24/7. So that's a very good question. And that question will be answered when my demise occurs or I'm not capable of making decisions. So
to be determined.
To be determined. And people can say, well, you're chicken. I go, well, I'm realistic.
Brian, tell me about the ways in which you've been involved in the local community and why that's so important to you.
There are not many business people that have historical knowledge of a city, of a community, or even a business. And sometimes I'll look at things that leadership wants to do, and I go, wait a minute, guys, where did you come with this idea? Explain to me the logic of this idea. And, sometimes I help them. Sometimes they ignore me. But I think that it's important for people, especially elected leaders, who are just cast with a whole bunch of duties and responsibilities, to sometimes get a different perspective. Sometimes I'm called or referred to by the younger groups of the angry old elder. And when they do that to me, I go, okay, fine. Let's walk through the issues. And how do we get this done? And my team is very good at that, because, sometimes you'll get engineers for the city that want to build sidewalks or roads, and you're going, okay, it's a pretty picture. Now, how do you keep people open? How do you make this function at the same time as you make this pretty road? Because if you get rid of all the businesses, and maybe that's your goal, because you want to get rid of these businesses, how do you make it work? And, I just think that it's important that people communicate about ideas. A lot of people run for office because they're single issue people. I'm going to fix the homeless. I don't like the trash that's going on. And then all of a sudden they get this position and they figure out that they now got to deal with sewers, and they got to deal with buses, and they got to deal with a whole bunch of other things that they didn't sign up for. And you got your constituents going, well, we want X, Y, and Z, And they're going, well, where am I going to get the funding from? Who am I going to take it from? Am I going to take it from the fire department, the police department? And, so they have to make choices. So I think that it's very important that the business community and historical knowledge is reminded of people.
And I read how there's an overpass that had become very cluttered with human waste and trash, and nobody was really doing anything about it. And you took it upon yourself, pulled out of your own pockets to clean that area up.
Yeah, and it's an ongoing process. They caught me doing it, but we just continue to do it, and now
they caught you doing it. They didn't want you to do it.
Well, the TV people caught me. I have no idea whether it's a very interesting avenue when you're dealing with federal interstates, because the property is actually owned by the federal government, the federal state. So that's technically under Homeland Security. And Homeland Security goes, wait, I don't want to deal with the homeless people. So, and then, the state and the city homeless department goes, well, we don't have jurisdiction to go on their land. So it's kind of one of these great things that don't fit, and they don't want to talk, and everybody just kind of wants to look the other way. So, we kind of keep it clean. Since that article, the city has spent $5 million remodeling our street, going from a 4-lane road to a 2-lane gentrified lane with cute sidewalks and bicycle paths and all kinds of things. So we'll see how.
Okay.
We'll see how this. We'll see how the next chapter works. One of the problems that they didn't do was fence in the area underneath the interstate where people would sleep.
Got it. Brian, I just have one more question for you, but before I ask it, I want to do two things. If you liked today's content, please hit the subscribe, like, or share button on your favorite podcast app. Brian, I also want to tell people the best way to get in touch with you. What would that be?
Brian@Shapiros.com.
Easy enough. Last question for you, Brian. I'm kind of curious. You've got obviously great historical vision, great historical context to pull from. I'm curious how you see your industry, and in particular Shapiro's, evolving in the next 5 years.
Well, Shapiro evolving in the next 5 years is somewhat of the growth plan of the city of Indianapolis, where they have taken downtown Indianapolis and put all the sports stadiums, convention centers, within a 3 or 4 block walking area. And I always tell people from out of town, I go, just think of a Big Ten fraternity and sorority party. That's what Indianapolis has done with sports. That people come to the city and they've just made it into one big, fun, exciting area to be. And they've also done this with conventions. I'm sure you just watched the U.S. Olympic swimming trials in Indianapolis, of which my wife and I went to one of these sessions, and it was absolutely spectacular. They took swimming and made it like an NFL game in announcing the swimmers, and also with laser lights, the Academy Awards, all combined into one. And just, for instance, row 1 of a Colts game for the swimming would be row 11. So row 11 during a Colts game was row 1 for swimming, because they made the platform. and it was just absolutely spectacular. And frankly, our business for the 10 days of swimming trials were better than when the Super Bowl was in Indianapolis.
Wow.
I mean, it was unbelievable what they did. Just you know.
And was it so much better because it was a longer period of time that it was going on, or does it just draw a bigger crowd?
The way that the city did it, the way that the people that run Visit Indy, the sports corporation for the city, and their vision basically to grow a sport. I mean, they basically took swimming and grew it into a national recognition. And they were bringing people from all over the country in. And at the end of the day, I mean, the people that spend the most money in a city are tourists. We have our regular customers, our regular business, but the growth is going to be with the tourist. And as the city keeps growing, downtown Indianapolis, and Indianapolis is kind of the blueberry as a Democrat city in the raspberry jello of the state. And because of that conflict, shall we call it, but they're Hoosiers at heart, they figure out how to get it done. Sometimes they wrestle and fight and scream at each other. And at the 11th hour, they come up with a pretty good plan. But getting to that 11th hour can be just turmoil. And you never know what's going to happen. Even from the potential of dissolving the city of Indianapolis by the state. I mean, it gets pretty crazy. But so the future of us is a lot of growth from just the city expanding their footprint. As for my industry, unfortunately, we're going to see the little local pockets of the entrepreneur restaurant person, but it's probably going to be in a second site of the original. They're going to take over somebody else's restaurant site that put too much money into it and couldn't afford the bill because restaurant equipment and everything is just so expensive today. A hood system. If you want to put a hood system into a restaurant, it's anywhere from $70,000 to $150,000, especially when you add 10 tons of air conditioning to that system. And they can't make enough money to pay for the cost to get into the restaurant business. So the chains, they can buy stuff cheaper and they'll put it in, but because there's so many other restaurants, they don't do a good job managing them. So you're going to have this turnover, but you're going to have the big chain restaurants, the heritage restaurants, and then you have little bits and pieces of mom and pop. So you're not going to see very many brand new mom and pop restaurants. They're going to end up, taking over a place that was somebody else's restaurant. And it's kind of like a used car. You can buy a $100,000 Porsche, and in 3 years you can buy it for $60,000. And it's still fine. And maybe the $60,000 Porsche, you got to spend $5,000 on it to fix something on it, but you're not going to spend the bigger number, and I think that's what's going to happen as we evolve. Because the mom and pop people, first of all, to put in a minimal kitchen is $350,000, maybe $500,000 realistically. Well, they're going to have a 75-seat restaurant. They're not going to be able to, and that doesn't include buying the tables, the chairs, doing the tenant improvements, putting in floors and all that stuff. So, you're looking at $1 million, $1.5 million just to start.
Yeah. So we're less likely to see mom and pops because the big guys can buy things at scale. They can operate at scale, which is more efficient, better pricing. And we'll probably see more of the used car thing, where somebody comes in and takes over an outfit that had paid the expensive price to equip a facility, and they can step in and they can operate it more efficiently now because they don't have that
right. And all they may need to do is buy a $10,000 new stove and a $10,000 new oven, and for $20,000 they got $500,000 of cooking equipment.
There you have it, folks. Brian, I want to be the first one to thank you for sharing both your time and your story with us today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. You've asked very enlightened questions, and hopefully your audience enjoys what they heard.
I'm sure that they will. Folks, that's a wrap on another episode of the Inspired Stories podcast. Thanks for learning with us today.